Okay, recording is in progress. Got it. Well, so I guess I just would really love to hear some reactions. I will just maybe start out by saying that this was the first story of this nature that I've ever read. And it was just an incredibly powerful experience for me. And it was difficult because it was my kind of my first exposure to someone sharing their own story. And of course, Sarah McBride's has so many different aspects to it that are painful to imagine what she went through. But I would just go around, and whoever would love to share what was your reaction, what surprised you, what most influenced you or impacted you emotionally when you were reading this book. So. And be sure to take yourself off of mute.
Right.
All right, I see someone there. Yeah.
Okay. I think it was very interesting. Her comment was that after coming out and becoming a woman, and she was wearing women's clothes, makeup, and so forth, Sarah was then confronted by the realities of being a woman. In other words, harassment, misogyny, sexism. And I wonder if she was prepared for that. And does the same thing happen to a transgender man? Is he all of a sudden God-like, like men are supposed to be, and so forth? You know, it was very interesting for her to say that and for her to make that realization.
We're still working on it.
I'm done.
Well, for am I on now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
For me, this was pretty personal. It's the first book I've read about transgender. My experience with transgender people was as a teacher. I had one particular student that stood out for sure as being transgender, and she was also autistic, and a new student at my school. And it was really the first time that I had to, as a teacher, deal with that. This was probably about 2010, and I'm so glad to hear that things have progressed since then, because she had was very forceful in the fact that she was identified from birth as a boy, and she really fought along with her parents in kind of an unfiltered way because of her autism to use the boys' bathroom, to turn out for the boys' sports, and quite frankly, the school district didn't know what to do. And what it did was it forced the school district, so this is about 12 years ago, to start making some decisions about whether or not, as a school district, they were going to be open and accepting of these changes and how they were going to educate parents. And just like in the book, the biggest issue was the bathrooms, which was ridiculous, because in the elementary school where I taught, in both the boys and girls bathrooms, there were stalls. So, this whole business about privacy and people coming in was a non-issue, but the parents made it an issue. So that was my first introduction to that. Aside from my own family, I have a niece who's now 25, 26 maybe. And from birth, we all knew that she identified herself as a boy. She always dressed in cowboy boots and cowboy hat, and being very naive at that point, 25 years ago, we'd say, well, what do you want to be, Kenna, when you grow up? And she said, well, I'm going to be a cowboy. And of course, we all said, no, you'll be a cowgirl. Well, here it is 25 years later, and, she has totally come out. The discrimination in the workplace has not been what she thought it would be, but people that don't know her are having a hard time with her transitioning. And so, it really touches my heart to see her really struggling as she goes through this.
Wow.
Yeah.
How old was the student that you had?
She was a fifth grader, 10.
Mhm.
And, it was really interesting to see her, begin to feel better about who she was with the encouragement of the school counselor and her parents. Her name was Samantha, and she wanted to be called Sam. And gradually during the year, she started wearing, boys' clothing. And then over the summer between her 5th and 6th grade year, she changed her haircut and everything. And really, at that age, you couldn't tell. You couldn't tell that she had, transitioned, at least, in her mind, from outwardly appearing as female to male. And really, it was interesting. The students, they're 10 and 11 years old. That was just Sam. She was Samantha as a 5th grader, and she was Sam as a 6th grader. And the kids really, they don't care. They really don't care. It's just what they hear from their parents. Yeah. So that's my little bit. I thought it was a great book. I thought it was a book that was very approachable to people that didn't have any background in this. And I just kept thinking, here she wasn't she like 25 or 26 when she wrote this book?
Or 27, I think.
I mean, I try to think about what I was like at 27, and there's no way. There's no way I could have been that articulate. It just, more power to her. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, what is cisgender? Cisgender. What is that? I didn't know.
That means you identify as your birth gender.
Somebody answered.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cisgender.
You're not trans. You identify with your birth.
Okay, so if you're a girl, you're a girl.
Right.
You associate with the gender you were assigned at birth.
I'd never heard that. That was the first time I'd ever seen it in the book, and I meant to look it up. So thank you.
I really liked the book as well. I thought, I'm just struck by, there's one other book I read, a trans testimonial book that I thought was outstanding, and it was written by Jennifer Finney Boylan. If you all know her, she does write editorials in the New York Times at times, and she transitioned when she was in her 40s. So she had 2 children, and she was married, and finally decided after 40 years of trying to be somebody she wasn't, she came out, and an amazing tales. So I highly recommend that one as well. I had never read one about a younger person making that transition. It's striking to me how these stories that I hear, these people know at a very young age that something's amiss. Yeah, it's just, so I tend to, when I hear young people expressing their belief that they're trans. I tend to believe them. It seems, I certainly never questioned my birth identity. It just felt right to me. So it's hard to imagine it feeling wrong. So it's a really curious thing, but I think that she was very articulate. And the Jennifer Finney Boylan book, she talks a lot about that whole, having lived her life as a man for 40 years, all the striking things about moving into the world as a woman that are really interesting as well.
I was a hairdresser. I think I may have told you this, and I had a client. Him and his wife used to come in, and it was the 80s, so he had his hair permed and he had it highlighted. And then told me, he kept coming in, and the girl said, "Oh, he fancies you." I said, "No, he's married." I was young, I was about 22, and he said, "I want to look like you." And then he told me he was going to come out. He wanted to be a woman, and he'd been married for like 10 years. And so when I spoke to his wife, she said, "Oh, he's always worn women's clothes at home." And I said, "Really?" Because he was like 6'6", he was probably 300 pounds. He just was so masculine. He had size 12 feet. And for him to transition to a woman was really difficult because he looked so manly.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I haven't seen the person who wrote the book, the one we just read, but sounded like that was a small person. And I would think as a large man, it would be much more difficult because you stand out, you know, while you're transitioning. And he actually did have reporters. He was in the newspapers. They followed him at his job. I was with him for 2 years, and then I moved to America, so I don't quite know what happened. But one of the neighbors, when he looked like a woman, a new neighbor moved in, didn't know he was a man because he had blonde hair and wearing women's clothes. And he said to me, "How am I going to tell him that I'm still a man without him beating me up?" And that's so frightening for them. The hatred, you know, that people who don't understand. So I don't quite know what happened because that was 30 years ago. He was just transitioning when I left. But I would think that's why a lot of people don't come out, because people get violent towards them.
Probably.
I had a friend whose son announced that he was trans, or she was trans, a few years ago, and she went to speak with her counselor about it because it's a difficult thing for any parent. And the counselor said at one point, "Did you know that I'm trans?" And she had no idea.
Huh.
So, some people really do, you can't tell
Yeah.
at all.
Well,
But
one thing in this book that struck me is when she talked about having the surgery, which changed her. She called it bottom surgery, and she talked about how her father was the one, when she went into the hospital, who seemed really little nervous about this whole business. That part of the book was a little, to me, glossed over. I was wondering, were there, unless I missed something in reading it, I mean, even to do a kidney donation, you have to go through all this psychological, at least that's what I've heard, questioning on, giving this away and being a donor and everything. What kind of, what do they go through prior to this surgery so that it is approved? I mean, and of course she was of age. She's not an underage minor or anything. So she can make that decision on her own and everything. But do the medical profession have something that they require of people before they go ahead with that kind of surgery? Maybe Mark could answer that.
There are a variety of medical associations that set guidelines in this whole realm. The American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association. And this area of basically elective surgery, many surgeries nowadays are elective in any case, has been a real bone of contention for many, many, many years. And the current, the current standards that I don't know how broadly it's held in, say, Idaho, but in states that are welcoming to this whole realm, there's no longer all of this long period of waiting and talking and figuring it out. That it is, people are realizing that gender identity is a complex phenomenon, and that the person best able to determine whether or not they do want a surgery or not is the person. And so that's the way it's evolving. I hope it continues that way. Some states will resist this, of course, but I think it's called WPATH, WPATH, which is the rights with regard to receiving treatments in the transgender world. But that's basically it. I imagine if you go to any hospital system, they will have their protocols, and I don't know what they all are. But there is so much more acceptance of this now that it is really allowing people to affirm themselves as themselves by themselves, and not expect some kind of third party to run them through 3 years of testing and therapies and stuff like that, and come up with an answer for that particular person. In fact, this is actually a global phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
It goes, I mean, not just the transgender thing, but the whole idea that you can self-identify is emerging globally. It has been for some time, it's not emerging. And countries are, and in fact, the US, Biden just announced that there will be an X option on passports, which allows you to get out of the binary system. And other countries are doing the same thing, allowing people to get documents. So it's affirming to the individual, the person who is living in their skin, to know who they are and how they present themselves and how they want to go with regard to surgery. By the way, bottom surgery, top surgery is not a given. Many transgender people, trans women, do not get bottom surgery. Many trans men do not get bottom surgery. Much more prevalent, a top surgery is much more prevalent in both trans women and trans men, but the bottom surgery is not a given. And yeah, so I hope that elucidates a little bit there.
So other reactions, thoughts?
Well, she was certainly the right person for the fight for gender equality issues. Actually, I wrote down my comments, but for this campaign, because she did come from such a highly supportive background, one of privilege, and with the political connections that would assist her in attaining the meaningful changes in legislation. And even in coming out, she had good support from her parents, her brother who was gay, and the woman he used to date, or she used to date, excuse me, who was also very, very supportive, even coming to her coming out party when she asked friends to bring, a piece of jewelry or a dress or whatever. So at any rate, she was a very fortunate person, because not everyone has that kind of support, as we know, particularly Black transgender people. And I think I mentioned at the last meeting that we had that one of the local poets here, Subaga Crystal Bacon, has a book coming out through BOAA next fall on the murders of transgender women. It's a book of poetry. And so she has kind of followed the news, and each poem is dedicated to a woman who has been murdered because she's transgender. And in this book mentions how the police even treated her when she had to go to the Capitol Police, when that woman threatened to cut off, if she hadn't had it done, I will cut that off, which was a horrible part of this book. And then Sarah said how the police just treat people like they're either prostitutes or they just discount them. So that's another issue that they face, is not feeling protected by law enforcement.
Barbara, you had a comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I got to watch a video, and you might, if you haven't seen it already, and you just put on YouTube, Sarah McBride, Tomorrow Will Be Different, and she speaks for about almost a half hour. And it's really kind of nice to hear her voice and the things that people asked her and what she thought were the most important parts of her book. And the nuggets that I got out of it was that you can't, people who hate you are still going to hate you no matter what. You can't change, but they can't change your mind and your heart, and they can't change who she is. And so she got a lot of strength from that. And she said that the more people would just get to know other people, no matter who they are, that is the thing that's really going to change society. And so her big point was, please vote for your mid-elections. Make sure that you are talking to other people, just sharing that no matter what ugliness is out there, that it's really important to share all the good stuff that's happening for trans people, because they are real people. And that's where she explained more about what she thought the hate was, is just the hate is people just not understanding. And often it seems to be the case, whatever it might be that they get mad at, they just don't understand all the aspects of it. But I thought it was really good advice. And then one or good points for her to make. And then she said her one piece of good advice was something that Beau Biden had said to her, which was, when you make plans, life has a way of intervening. Make sure you focus on the moment. And that was kind of her parting words in it. But I thought it was really a good listen. So I recommend it.
That's good, Barb. Adding on to that, I was just writing down some of the things that she says, none of us know how long we have. So we have to make the choice to love or to hate. And then she talks a lot about being positive, and she remains positive because of the youth. And that kind of ties in with what you're saying. Yes. Her journey into politics, never only one way to love.
It's almost like a Brene Brown moment here, courage and vulnerability. It's definitely that, she comes across that way. Every time I hear her or read, when I read the book, she's pretty remarkable. She's the highest elected trans person in the country. But there are a lot of others. And if you just look at this, they're all across the country, mayors, members of state legislators, members of town councils. They're out there, they're leading. And it's just really great, really uplifting to hear their stories and read their stories. And the other thing is that there's a lot of positive media on this. I don't know. This is one of those vulnerability moments. I watched the Supergirl series, and I don't know if any of you have seen the Supergirl series. It's a really fun series, but in any case, there is a trans superhero in that series. Her name is Dreamer, and she is Nicole Maines, who was perhaps the first, I think one of the first ones to get really national recognition or media or whatever, because of the, she was in Maine, and they had a first bathroom bill and the struggle around bathrooms up there. And she plays Dreamer. She's just a remarkable actress. And it really was fun watching her. And she's of course done other stuff too. And also, you know, we've been watching some of Grey's Anatomy, and they have a number of trans people in Grey's Anatomy, including top surgeons as well as residents in the hospitals. And so there is a very positive portrayal, and it helps. I think, you know, going back to the point of these are human beings just like you and me, and they are, you know, they're having the courage to step out and be vulnerable and live their lives. So it's really great.
I'd just like to comment on the rapidity of change. It was so interesting, her description of her coming out at American University and the overwhelming positivity that she felt, and acceptance and support, and from all kinds of places. And then her going home and facing her parents from another generation and their struggle. And parents have different issues, certainly, and I'm sure they were terrified, as she was. She was incredibly empathic for their and understanding of why they were struggling. But I'm sure she was able to be that way because of the support that she got from her peer community. And when you think this was, it was 2012 when she came out, is that right?
Yeah.
The change in conversation, just the number of people, is fascinating for me. How I felt in my life, I wasn't sure I knew any trans people until my grandson at age 3 was so clear about being a boy, and in tears when people tried to call him a girl. And the two things about that were fascinating was how, and this story is not unique, but how his mother listened. And that was true for Nicole Maines in Orono and Maine. Her mother listened and paid attention to what her child was saying to her. But also, as I can't remember whether it was Jane or who mentioned this, the children don't have trouble with it. It's the grown-ups. Maybe it was Kay who mentioned that, or maybe you both did, I don't know. There's no difficulty letting somebody be who they say they are. For the children in my grandson's class. It's also interesting that he is not the first trans child in his school in Wenatchee. He is not the first trans child in when he was in preschool. And that, you know, his experience, certainly there's the potential for what might happen if he goes to Texas, but it does feel like the world has capacity for change. And as Lois says, that love, I mean, and the voice of Sarah emphasizing compassion and love. I mean, she was a pretty powerful messenger.
Thanks, Betsy. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, I have to agree. Betsy.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Elise.
I just added a quick word. Thank you for reading this book. I was very impressed. It was such a positive thing after our book club meets this evening, and we're evaluating The House of Impossible Beauties, which I wouldn't exactly recommend for you to read. It's on the other side of the spectrum, which was a little negative considering we have too now a granddaughter who is in ninth grade. She came out in the fall, and so like you, Betsy, it's a surprise and a change, but probably more acceptable in elementary school than high school. But there's certainly a lot of acceptance, but there's also some negativity. Moving to the ILC has, last week, I think she finds her pod, but it's common that is as we, everybody's reading books and listening and evaluating, and I'm just so thrilled that it's now rather than 20 years ago. I worked at the Pike Market Clinic years ago, and that was my first experience with meeting a trans person who was getting evaluated for psychological change. And after that, I hadn't met anybody else until all this has come up. And now it's just, as you're saying, it's just so common, especially in some of the high spectrum kids that are, coming out later. And I'm just so thrilled. There's so much out here for us to learn and be supportive about, and the community is supportive, and it's wonderful.
Thank you.
One of the ideas, I mean, we've touched on a little bit, but I think Mark mentioned it, and that is the idea of gender fluidity. That we are so hardwired to think of things as this or that. And I think that part of this remarkable evolution is beginning to break down that bifurcation of how we think about gender. What we're learning in the natural world, that, I mean, we aren't the only species that has this quality, this ability of gender fluidity. And I just have the sense that there's so much we don't know about certainly about the natural world. And the more we learn about that, the more perhaps it will help us to open up our minds to a whole different way of thinking. I guess that's certainly my hope. But the point has been made a lot about the rapidity of change. Think about the fact that Sarah McBride is only 33 years old right now, or 32. And so, where's she going to go? She's, anyway, that's very exciting to think about her future and how she can inspire other people like her to step up and speak their truth. The only other thing that we haven't touched on at all in this book, and that was the story of her great love with Andy. And the way in which, life gave her this extraordinary relationship and then took it away so quickly. But the way in which she, her vulnerability in describing that, in sharing the pain and sharing, sometimes she just wanted to walk away from it. She felt inadequate at times to stick with him in his terrible path, I just thought that added for me so much to the book. It just so reinforced her extraordinary humanity and compassion.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to ask, when people do change, from male to female or the other way around, are they sometimes attracted to the same partner? That kind of confused me, because they were both transgender, right?
Yes.
Like Andy had been a lady and became a man, or she didn't completely become a man. I wasn't quite sure of that, because they didn't go into much detail, did they?
Well, they both transitioned.
So she was, so do some become women and then end up with women? Or it's just each case is different?
That's right. Each case is different.
Yeah.
Gender and sexual orientation are two different realms, and
Right.
It's not going to necessarily change your sexual orientation.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
It might
It just sort of reinforces the whole realm of incredible variety and the beauty of that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes us seem like, way back when it was so boring. This makes it so much.
What were you gonna say, Betsy? What were you gonna say?
The person who Jane mentioned, Jennifer Boylan, but knew she was a woman early on in her life, but suppressed that and had a very successful life as a writer and professor, and was married and had, I think, 3 children, and stayed as a woman. After she transitioned, she stayed with her partner, the person she was married to. So, but she was in that relationship, she was her true self, which was a woman.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, Mark, I think you have to think about way back when, like before all. Maybe back then it was easier.
I don't know,
Yeah.
the Native American cultures have a lot of acceptance around this, you know. Aranutik is I think mostly Northeastern tribes, but many Native cultures and other earlier cultures around the world have been accepting of, you know, the two-spirit or you know, the variety of gender much longer than we have. We've kind of like adopted kind of Western European style around this thing and culture around this thing, and we're not breaking out of it. But it goes way back. It's, you know, it's the beginning.
So I know we're kind of short on time here, but I did, and Alyssa, you referred to this a little bit, but I am curious how you all see our community here, right here. I mean, are we generally welcoming? And probably the answer is some people yes and some people no, but I don't have any direct experience of that myself, but do others?
I'd say it's a real mixed bag.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Interesting.
I have heard that one of the ILC students has done some training is starting to do more training throughout the school system and a few other places for the community. And, you know, if we look around this room, the connection with the power of connection and is so present that all of us, so many of us have had some experience with someone who has come out to us as trans. And that seems to me like the thing that will change the world.
It's like so many things that we always refer to and deal with. It's ignorance and fear that feed the hatred. If we're battling the ignorance and fear, then we're at least doing something.
Betsy, I remember reading something about the ILC student and commenting on it, that it would be really nice if she or he, I'm not sure who it
It's Chloe Sprower, actually.
Okay,
Good.
so if Chloe would be willing, which I know that would be really hard, but if she would be even willing to do a presentation just to help educate us a little bit more, I think it could make a difference, just as long as she was protected from any.
She's not trans, but
Okay.
she has a passion about, she may be gender fluid. I'm not sure about that. She may be a they, I don't know.
Yeah, whatever she is,
yeah.
it would just be anything to help educate our community would be a really good thing. And it could be on a Zoom format or something informal.
That's an excellent suggestion and we'll pursue it.
Good.
Wait, Bessie, is she so she is the kind of person, I mean, there are some people that would be offensive to because they are shy or they don't want to have to tell others who they are or prove it, you know? Is she the kind of personality that would like to share that?
I don't know that. I think we'd have to talk with her. Ask.
Well, I think maybe Jane wants to wrap up here, but I would just thank you all so much for for taking the time to read this book and consider these issues. And for myself, it feels like this is a real starting point. So let's keep the conversation going. I think that's so important. Thank you.
Definitely. And Mark and Maggie, thank you both so much for leading this excellent discussion, and for all of you who've been part of it. Many, many thanks. I have one question I have to ask you, and that is, do we want to continue meeting by Zoom? Do we want to get together again on the third Thursday of May at 1 o'clock? And if so, what banned book would we like to read? Anybody have any ideas?
Do you just want suggestions, Jane, not have tos, just suggest?
Sure.
One that I was surprised that was on a list is Sherman Alexie, The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And I was surprised that was on a list. Some of my high school kids read that a long time ago. You know, he's a Spokane, Coeur d'Alene Native American. This is Seattle. And that's a pretty easy and interesting book. It does have sexual context. It was taken out of some of the schools because he talks about masturbation and becoming sexually alive and his awakening. But it also deals with a lot of the tragedy and the reality of growing up on one of the Indian, the reservations.
Would you like to champion that book, Lois, and get us started in a discussion next month?
Okay.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Well, that's just one of many ideas.
I think that's a good one, though. I read it a long time ago.
It's a very good book.
It's an easier read.
Can you spell it?
The name of it is The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. And he's been on NPR, the local Seattle station, many times. You've probably heard him speak. Very interesting.
Book available at the library, I assume.
You know, I don't know, Jane.
I'm sure it would be, but we can all check that.
And I think it was in paperback, so it probably wouldn't be.
Probably be available used on one of the many used book sites too.
True.
And can you spell the last name, Alexie?
Alexie. Alexie. Sherman Alexie.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
It does indeed.
He has quite a few books. Probably some of you have read some of his other ones. Yeah. Anyway.
So everybody, I hope to see you again on the third Thursday in May at 1 o'clock. And we will be talking about this book that Lois has just given us, The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Spencer Alexie.
Sherman.
Alexie, I'm sorry, I wrote the wrong thing and said it.
All right, you would find it.
Yeah. And again, I thank you all so much for being part of this discussion. I think it's been a really deep and meaningful discussion. And I thank Mark and Maggie for making that possible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark and Maggie.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.